All right, shall we get going? All right, welcome to the April 28, 2016 meeting of the Sacramento Metropolitan Fire District Finance and Audit Committee meeting. Do we have any public speakers?
There are no speakers this evening.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to the consent calendar. I'll take a motion if there's one.
Mr. Chairman, if it pleases the group, I move I move the consent agenda.
And I'd like to second.
Wonderful. Would you call for the vote, please?
Director Kelly,
Aye.
Jones,
Aye.
and Wood.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Great. Our first item on presentation is the California Employees Retirement Benefit Trust Annual Update. CFO Thomas and Matt Goss.
Financial Officer. I am here this evening to introduce Matt Goss from the California Employers Retirement Benefit Trust, or CERBT, which is our OPEB, or Retiree Medical Trust Fund. He's here to provide the annual update on the performance of that fund. And I did, just before he gets into his presentation, want to clarify that you may have noticed that there's an item on this evening's full board agenda to talk about the other post-employment benefit, or OPEB, or retiree medical valuation as of July 1st, 2015. That valuation has not yet been finalized, so the numbers that Matt will be speaking to this evening are the most recent finalized valuation, which are July 1st, 2013. So I didn't want that to cause any confusion, and I think he'll emphasize that when he goes through the numbers as well. And with that, I will turn it over to Matt.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Amanda. Good evening, directors and Chief Wells. I appreciate your time. My goal today is, just as it has been with all of the other employers that participate in our program, is just to share your progress and the evolution of your OPEB plan and answer any questions that you have. The reason we do this is because we understand, while it's important to continue to grow our trust fund by the number of agencies that participate, it's also important to retain the existing agencies. We want to make sure that they're happy, and so that's the primary reason we're here. I'm going to go ahead and, with respect for time, just jump to slide number 4 in the slide deck, and you all have that in front of you, I'm assuming. So I just wanted to review briefly the liability situation dating back to July 1st, 2013, which had an accrual of OPEB liabilities dating back to the very first day you offered these benefits to active employees up until July 1st, 2013, of $156,358,864. And then your actuary, Kathy McLeod at Bickmore Risk Services, said if we wanted to add to that the projected future accruals, so we knew every single penny that the district as of July 1st, 2013 would ever pay out for these benefits, let's go ahead and look at that. And that number is called the present value of benefits, and it is $187,762,208. So that explains why it's higher than the AAL, because you're projecting additional future growth of the liability. The actuaries are pretty smart. They realize that most employers don't have $156 million just sitting around for a rainy day. So they provide you with a systematic method of setting that money aside in the form of the annual required contribution, which can be confusing because there's no contributions ever required to our trust fund, and pre-funding OPEB is a voluntary mechanism. But that said, the annual required contribution is comprised of 2 components: a keep-up component called the normal cost, which in your case was $4,291,000. And then it's a catch-up component or cost, and that's tied to the fact that in the beginning of benefit offering, you were not pre-funding. And so what the actuary does is they take the entire unfunded portion of the liability, they slice it into the number of years remaining in the amortization schedule, they add it to the normal cost, and there's your arc. And so you can see it's the difference between the $14 million and the $4 million. It's $10,180,843. So why is the ARC important? It's important because if you set aside in the form of contributions to the trust fund and contributions to the premium providers that dollar amount annually, and it earns a rate of interest of 7.25%, which is the discount rate your actuary projects, then over the course of the amortization schedule, you will have fully funded the AAL of $156 million. So now that we're on the same page about what the goals are long-term, let's go ahead and look at your performance. We're going to skip this slide because we already know that you're working on your renewal valuation report. It's here in draft, and it's just a matter of finalizing. So we're going to go to slide number 6. And what I'm going to do is read data from slide number 7 for you while you kind of look at slide number 6. So slide number 7 is just simply the data behind slide number 6. You all joined the trust fund back in June of 2012, and you made your first contribution to the trust fund in August of that same year. It was $1,777,117. And since that time, you've added additional contributions to the tune of $15,758,163. You have not reimbursed at all over that entire lifespan. Through March 31st of 2016, we were able to take your investment principal and generate an additional $667,266, for which we charged you a grand total, all-inclusive expense of $27,927. So a pretty good deal. And your total assets as of March 31, 2016, we're at $18,174,619. Now, the last time we spoke to you on June 30th, 2014, you had earned over 14, almost 15%. It was 14.73%. Today, or through March 31, 2016, that number dropped to 2.52%. So what that tells you is that over the last year and more, the market conditions were not very good. The 14-15 marketplace was a completely flat marketplace where we lost just a little bit less than 0.25%. And then the first 9 months of the current fiscal year through March only had 3 months that were positive, and so it was a rough ride. March was really good for us, so we came back significantly, over 6 percentage points, but we're still, hovering right around flat. And so when you start to look at the short window of total time your assets have been exposed to the asset allocation strategy that you're in, the number can just fluctuate significantly from a 14% plus number to a 2% plus number. The good news is, if we go to slide number 8, you're moving in the right direction with your overall long-term goal. And this is truly a long-term game. The reason for that is because OPEB benefits are long-term. They will be paid out by the district over the course of many, many decades into the future. And so what you'd really like to do is just grow your total market value of assets by accumulating as many units of the trust fund as possible, and then worrying a little bit less about, at this point in time in particular, the value of those units, knowing that over the long term, the value of those units will inevitably increase and you will have more money. This slide simply projects your future actual accrued liability. You can see that we've rolled forward your actual AAL as of June 30th, 2013 to June 30th, 2015, and it increased by, somewhere between 15 and 20 million based on our projection. And then we compared that to your actual market value of assets at June 30, 2015, and we had you projected at 8.06%, which is up from 1.34%. So you're moving in the right direction. The downside of that is right now the primary variable that's moved you in that direction is your investment principal. What you'd like to see over the next 10, 20, 30 years is the ratio between investment income and investment principal increasing more and more favorably on the investment income side. We have to do our job. And you'll monitor that as you move forward, and we'll continue to come here annually and let you know how you're doing, okay?
Please.
Sure.
So on the previous slide, it had 8-point-something%. That is the increase in the monies that we put in vis-a-vis the 2.5%, and that's what the market got us over the last couple of years. Is that correct? I'm looking to understand the difference
Sure.
in ratio numbers.
Yeah. I understand your question. To answer the is it correct, in part, it is correct. But what's happening is your target goal to be fully funded is changing as well. So it's a moving target. And so what you have to do is you have to look at the market value of your assets and your liabilities as of the same date, and you have to continually do that over time. Then you can better answer that question. So I do,
Okay.
go ahead, did I help you there?
So the slide we're looking at now.
Yeah.
The funded ratio is column 2 and column 3.
The funded ratio would be column 4, funded ratio.
Right, but I'm sorry, I don't have my little calculator in my head nor in hand.
Oh, I see.
So 156 versus 2, is that 1.34?
Yes.
Got it.
Yes.
Okay, thank
I
you.
understand your question. Yeah. And so what you want to see is the market value of your assets growing, and you want that to grow commensurate with your liability. You're playing a game right now of catch up. Once you get fully caught up, you're just going to want to keep up. So you won't always be in this catch-up phase where it's more expensive and the arc is going to be larger. At some point, you're going to get to a point where the arc is actually cheaper than what your pay-as-you-go bills would have been had you not joined our trust. And so once you get there, the burden on your budget becomes less, and then in the future, it will become non-existent, ideally.
Ideally.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes,
Appreciate
sure.
it.
This is our menu of options, and the reason I show it to you is because it evolves, and I just wanted to point that out. So every 4 years, we review these asset allocation strategies because we perform an exhaustive 12 to 18-month review of our investment policy, which is separate and unique. It's different from the pension fund's investment policy. And so we will be doing that in another 2 years. And so these numbers can change once every 4 years or so. But currently, and for your 2015 valuation, these numbers are valid. I'm going to leave any explanations tied to the use of investment return assumptions and things like that for Amanda, because she has the draft report that she's going to be talking about later this evening. But just know that some of the shaping and selection of the discount rate that's used by the actuary ties back to the number here for you in strategy 1, which is 7.28%. And that's because that's the 20-year median projected investment return annualized from that investment vehicle. And then I'll leave the rest for her. But I wanted to show you where that number comes from so that you would understand better when Amanda dives into the detail. This is specifically how your assets are invested in 5 different public market asset classes. What you gather from this, because your money is in strategy number 1, is that most of your money is in global equity. And right now, based on your funding level, that's probably where it should be. But it's also in fixed income. It's in global REITs. It's in tips and commodities. And if you ever wanted to learn more about how we do that and why, I'm happy to share. But for the purposes of tonight's meeting, I'm going to go ahead and just continue to move forward. What I want you to know is that in the future, though, let's just say 10, 15 years from now, when you become very healthy in your funding level, you can choose strategy 2 or 3 and just change at any time. And it's not a totally different approach. It's just a shifting of the level of participation within those asset classes. You would drop, for example, your participation in equities and increase it in fixed income. And so we have a solution for your future needs as your plan continues to evolve. That's the real message I'm trying to get across to you. And as you continue to try to preserve the assets you're building up, we'll add additional asset allocation strategies that aren't probably necessary for our customer pool today. So just know that the future is being thought about even now, and you'll have options that meet your needs. This is what most of our employers are doing right now, is they're investing in strategy number 1, just like you. What this slide shows you is that 350 of them combined have a liability in aggregate that, when you compare their money, is 28% funded. So it doesn't go as far as to say that on average employers are 28% funded, because that would be an average of the average. In this case, we're just saying if you pool all of the liabilities and all of the assets of those 350 employers that are in strategy 1, you're one of those employers, the plan itself, the strategy is 28% funded. The reason this is helpful is because it shows you that you're not well funded and that you're probably in the right place in terms of an investment choice. Now, inevitably, you can choose whatever you want, and we'll do it on your direction, but just if that helps you feel comfortable about where your money is now, that was my goal in showing you this. Here's our investment results on slide 13. This is through, again, March 31 of 2016. We're showing you 19 different data points for the 3 strategies over, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 different time periods. And what you'll notice if you looked at these results for more time than we have tonight and compared them to their performance benchmarks, we exceed 18 of 19. And then the one that we miss is strategy 3 fiscal year to date. We missed by only 4 basis points. That's quite frankly pretty remarkable. And what that tells you is that the reason that your returns went down is because market conditions weren't very good. But within that environment, we performed better than what we were projected to perform when measured against performance benchmarks. So we're confident that there's not any issues with our long-term investment policy and our strategies. It's just a matter of timing and the events that occurred during that short window, and that over the long term you're in an investment vehicle that will service you in a way that you'll be pleased with. I'll point out also that these numbers for 3-year, 5-year, and inception to date are significantly better than what you would have gotten in your pay-as-you-go alternative like county treasury, LAIF, or money market during that same window, where you probably would have earned around, if you're lucky, about 0.5%. So, you're way ahead of schedule compared to that. Our cost is still really low. Last time we talked to you, I believe it might have been 15, but probably it was shifting downward to 13 basis points. Stand here today to tell you that it's 10 basis points. So we actually reduced our cost by 33% over the course of the last 24 months of operation. So we've answered a question that I had, and I started to become concerned with, is, when we started out, we were at 2 basis points, and then we grew and we got to 15, is can we actually reverse that? And we did. So we're really pleased with that. I'm also pleased to tell you all that the state of California is going to be ramping up their pre-funding quite significantly over the course of the next decade. We anticipate doubling our inbound cash flows net of disbursements from around $600 million to over at least $1 billion annually. And that means for you an even more stable trust fund than what is already a very stable trust fund. And the likelihood of our ability to keep fees low and within a range that outpaces our competitors substantially is very high. So it makes my life easier, and it makes it cheaper for you to participate. Just want to share a little bit of information on how things are going to change for you when it comes time to close your books. GASB 75 is coming, and that will replace GASB 45. So right now, the way that you compliantly report your OPEB liabilities on your financial statements is all described and identified for you in GASB statement number 45. That will be replaced by GASB statement 75 no later than the 17-18 fiscal year. So on your June 30th, 2018 financial statements, you will need to comply with GASB 75. And what it does is it eliminates the ARC as a variable for financial reporting. Instead, you're going to book the entire unfunded portion of your actuarial accrued liability. If I was to sum that up for you in layman's terms, I'll basically say this. Right now, you're only having to report an annual sliver of the total pie that is the bigger problem. And so it doesn't have the appearance of a large problem since you're already pre-funding it and paying some of that contribution in the form of your bills. Now you're just booking the entire unaddressed problem directly on the balance sheet in a very similar way that you do with GASB 68 on the pension side. So unfortunately for you, since you're only around 8% funded, this is going to be a pretty significant blow in the form of total liabilities, and could affect to some extent your net position. There's a bunch of other smaller variables that are occurring here, but the most significant one is what I just described. And for you, you have a little bit of time. You have the next 2 fiscal years to, ask yourselves how you want to prepare for that. But most employers are in the same boat. So, as long as you have a funding policy in place that you envision working for you over the course of the next 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years, your actuary will probably support what I would suggest, which is just to continue to stick to that funding policy and address it annually over the long term. None of these bills come due all at once at the same time for the total amount. While this is disappointing for our participating employers, it's not the end of the world. Some of the things you're going to want to think about here are the fact that the amortization periods are going to get shorter. And this could impact the volatility of your expense reporting. I'll let Amanda and your actuary explain more about that for you, but that's something to think about. The ARC does go away for the purpose of financial reporting, but it will still exist in the report as a budgeting barometer for you so that you can kind of decide how much money on an annual basis you want to set aside. So by no means is it a bad idea to discuss the ARC and talk about what percentage of it you'd like to contribute towards. I think that's still a really valid conversation and should be had. It's just not going to have an impact on the balance sheet of your financial statements. One thing that's definitely going to happen, and then I'll move off of this subject, is that at the end of the year, closing your books is just going to become a little bit more laborious in the OPEB area because ultimately you're increasing the historical reporting to about 10 years. And this probably will take a little bit more time, and it could mean that your audit process, especially in the first couple years, is just a little bit more tedious. Maybe your bill for the audit increases because of total man hours. So it's just something to be braced and prepared for. There's no better plan than to contact the auditor and the actuary well in advance, figure out what you need to be thinking about, and then get your ducks all in a row. So, Amanda knows that. We've talked about that. She's doing that already, so you're all ready to roll. Here's a little table for you just to remind you of when you're going to, at the least, need to comply. I've talked to Amanda already about reaching out to the auditor to see if they interpret things differently than us because, that's the police officer in this situation, not us. So we may have interpreted the standard differently than your auditor does, and so you may have to go a little bit earlier than this, but we believe that's the minimum. One of the things that I'm aware that you're talking about is this implicit rate subsidy that is now required to be recognized and no longer allowed to be exempted from the total liability calculation. So let's first just talk about what it is, and then I'll explain to you the impact. The implicit rate subsidy is described really well in a situation that exists between me and my mom. She's a retired teacher. She gets her medical benefits through CalPERS, though, just like I do. We have the same doctor. That doctor only takes one of the CalPERS medical plans, so we have the exact same plan. My mom's a little bit older than me, as you'd anticipate. She goes to the doctor a little bit more than me, as you might guess. And so I'm, in reality, subsidizing some of her costs because we pay the exact same amount. So there was this big debate between the accountant-minded folks and the actuaries, and the jury in this debate was the Actuarial Standards Board. And the accountant-minded folks said, well, we need to recognize the true age-adjusted cost of these benefits. And the actuaries said, the true cost isn't going to change in these plans like plans at CalPERS that are community rated. So you're just going to increase liabilities, and people are going to pre-fund those unnecessarily, and then they're going to have more money than what their bills are truly going to be in the future. Well, that common sense argument lost. And the Actuarial Standards Board changed ASOP 6, the Actuarial Standard of Practice number 6, and said no more exemptions. Everyone must recognize implicit rate subsidy for all actuarial work performed on or after March 31, 2015. That's why you have to recognize it in your June 30, 15 or July 1, 15 OPEB actuarial evaluation report, and it has increased your liability by a significant amount. The question of whether or not you want to pre-fund that additional amount, and it's tied to your ARC as well, is up to you. It's for you to decide, and I understand you're going to have a discussion about that. But just know that if you do, there is a possibility that in the future you'll have significantly more money than you ever need to pay for all these benefits. The problem is that coming with GASB 75, you're going to pay a consequence once you get fully funded if you don't address that portion of the liability. So, right now it's not that big of a deal because your funded level is so small. it doesn't matter much, but in the future, it will matter more. So it'd be interesting to see what you all do. I'm curious. I learn from these situations just as much as I can be helpful. I know that you all were doing some cost sharing. You're okay. We can skip this slide. You know how this works. We talked about this in the past and learned a lot from you all in the process. I'm almost done here. I just wanted to wrap up a couple things I wanted to share. Some real good news. The trust fund continues to do well. We're going to hit around 30 employers this year. Last year we did 35. We're quickly going to hit 500. We're not going to do it by June 30th, but I anticipate by Christmas of next year we'll be at 500. There's a possibility, depending upon the market conditions over the next few months, that we could hit $5 billion in assets before the end of this fiscal year, but we certainly will probably do that. Market conditions, behaving as we'd like them to by Christmas as well. So some pretty good milestones for the program. You can see that we're bringing in a lot of money in the form of positive cash flow, and we're increasing the trust fund's assets under management while reducing the costs. So all good things to share. We're currently working with 28 other fire-based agencies, fire districts, departments, et cetera, including you. And you're part of a total of what is now actually 482 employers. We just added another today. So we just keep on steady Eddie growing the program in the right direction. Here's a kind of a chart of that growth. I'll skip through that. One of the things I want to share is that I believe, and it's in these next two slides, numbers 25 and 26, and then I'll wrap it up, is that the investment policy itself that we implemented is working, and it's unfolding according to plan. The one thing we didn't plan for, and you couldn't plan for, is that we opened this trust fund at probably the worst possible time in history, except for maybe something in the 1930s. It's just been a really volatile marketplace. But employers have been impressive with their contributions. So we've taken $3.5 billion in contributions since June of 2007. And we've generated about $1.2 billion on top of that in investment income. And if you compare that to what would have been generated in, those Leif County Treasury money market accounts, it's a lot more. So it's been good for everybody. We want it to be better, though. Here's our contact information. You can call me directly anytime. Do you have any questions? All right. Well, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Outstanding. Moving on then to presentation item number 2, Ms. Thomas.
I'll need just a second to pull up the presentation. Okay. Good evening again. I will be presenting tonight the financial report for the first 8 months of the current fiscal year. So that's for the period ending February 29th, 2016. And the first chart that we look at is the total cash balance. As I always point out, this is all cash, so this is not just the general fund that we're looking at, but all funds of the district, total cash. You can see that by the end of February, looking at the red line, which is the current fiscal year, that we did return to positive overall territory in terms of our cash balance. That's as a result of getting our first installment of property tax revenues in January. So you can see that we're in line with generally what the contours are in positive territory overall at about $27 million as of the end of February. This next chart is showing us our general fund reserves. So unlike the previous chart, this really is just focusing on the general fund. And it's not showing us cash, but rather what our overall reserve is. And the way that we calculate that is we're looking at our starting reserve balance at the beginning of the fiscal year, and then we're subtracting our, we're adding our year-to-date revenues and subtracting our year-to-date expenses. So as of the end of February, our reserves were $5.2 million. And we expect by the end of the year that our reserves will be $20.5 million, or roughly 11.6% of net budgeted expenditures. Turning to look at our revenues, this chart is showing us our medic cost recovery revenues. You can see, looking at the lines on this chart, where the actual results for this year are in red. Our budget for this year is in blue, and then last year's results are shown in green, that we're continuing to trend ahead of where we were last year. And we're right now showing just below our revised mid-year budget number for this revenue category. We did increase our budget at mid-year to $33.8 million based on what we had seen year-to-date for the first 6 months of the year in terms of outpacing the prior year numbers and what we had originally budgeted for this year. So, we are expecting to finish the year at $33.8 million. Looking at total revenues, you can see that overall we are trending slightly below the budget and prior year at a total of $102.8 million through the end of February. This is really primarily due to the timing of our IGT revenues. Those were recognized in February of last year, and that transfer didn't actually occur until March of this year. So I think we will have caught up by the time we see the next report. There's just a bit of a timing lag in terms of February last year versus March of this year. We are expecting to finish the year overall with revenues of $184.3 million. Turning to expenses now, this chart is showing salaries and benefits expenses, and at $101.6 million roughly through the end of February, we're on track with the mid-year budget of $152.3 million for the year. You can see by the lines on this chart, comparing the red line to the green line, that we are trending well ahead of fiscal year 14-15 results. That gap is widening in the second half of the year, and that's primarily as a result of the elimination of the pension cost sharing for the second half of the year. Looking at total expenditures, those also are trending below budget and sort of on par with the prior year. But again, this is really due to the timing of that IGT expense. As I mentioned when I was talking about revenues, the February versus March issue. Overall, expenditures totaled $120.2 million through February, and we're expecting to end the year at $186.4 million. This final chart is showing the balance in the SERPed fund. Again, everything in this report is as of February 29th, 2016. So as of that date, our total balance in the SERPed fund, which is our OPEB trust fund, was $16.7 million. This chart is showing us from the inception of our participation in the fund through February of 2016, we have made contributions of a little over $17 million, and actually over that entire life had seen losses of a little over $300,000. As Matt Goss from SERP just reported out, if we were to look through the end of March, we're in positive territory in terms of investment return, well into positive territory. So it's a bit of a timing issue when we're looking at this through the end of February. Obviously, we're reflecting some challenging market conditions, but we have seen some recovery in the performance of the fund since then, and would expect that these numbers to look better in the next bi-monthly report, where we would be capturing the March and April results. So to summarize the results for the first 8 months of the year, revenues and total expenditures are trending slightly behind the budget, but that's mainly due to the timing of IGT. We're expecting to hit the budget targets by the end of the fiscal year. Our salaries and benefits expenses are trending really right on budget and ahead of the prior year results. And to date, our expenses have exceeded our revenues by $17.3 million, but we project by the end of the year that that deficit will be $2.1 million, in line with our mid-year budgeted amount. With that, I would be happy to take any questions.
Any questions for Ms. Thomas? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, at this time, we don't have a further meeting date on calendar, but I would estimate it would probably be the second Thursday of May.
I believe it will be a special meeting due to our annual workshop, so it will be May 25th.
Okay. We'll get that on calendar out so everyone has notice. Anything else from my fellow directors?
Nothing from me, thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. We'll be adjourned.